I am Elena Rossi, 33 years old, and for years I thought the greatest battle of my life was paying off student loans and building a career that no one believed I could. I worked 70 hours a week, climbed until my hand shook, and finally bought a penthouse in Seattle that I called my victory. But I never imagined that victory would become the weapon my own family would use against me. At my sister's wedding, while the music played and guests raised their glasses, whispers started spreading that I was giving away my home as a gift. By the time my father stepped up to the microphone, the eyes of nearly 150 guests had turned on me, waiting to see if it was true. What happened next shattered every illusion I had about family. And it left me facing a choice that would change not just my future, but the balance of power in our entire family. Stay with me, because the truth of what unfolded that night is something you will want to hear to the very end. To understand how it all began, you have to know where I came from. Living in Seattle, working as a financial consultant with a view of the skyline that reminded me every day how far I had come, I carried the weight of a success built on loneliness. That loneliness had its roots back in Portland, in a childhood where I was always the one expected to fend for myself. My parents, Arthur and Beatrice, never tried to hide who their favorite was. My younger sister Chloe was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She had new dresses every school year, signed up for expensive summer camps, and her room was filled with trophies even before she turned 10. I was the one who learned to make do with hand-me-downs, the one who spent weekends babysitting the neighbors' kids to earn pocket money while Chloe was out at dance practice or being dropped off at the mall with her friends. There were moments when I thought maybe, just maybe, if I excelled enough, my parents would notice me. Debate was my thing. I loved the rush of standing at the podium, laying out arguments, countering every point. I practiced until my throat was raw. But Arthur and Beatrice never bothered to come to a single practice. The night of the state championship is burned into my memory. I was 16, dressed in the only blazer I owned. When they announced my name as the winner, I felt something inside me swell so big I thought it would lift me right off the stage. I turned to look for my parents in the crowd, hoping this would be the moment they finally saw me. But the seats were empty. Afterward, I walked out into the cool night air and pulled out my phone. Beatrice answered, her voice rushed and full of background noise. She told me they could not make it because Chloe had a big performance at her school. I hung up before she could say anything else. I remember sitting on the curb outside the auditorium, the metal cold and heavy against my chest. It was in moments like that when I made silent promises to myself. If no one else would take care of me, I would. If no one else would cheer for me, I would learn to live without it. College became my escape route, even if it meant signing my name on loan papers that felt like a lifetime sentence. By the time I graduated, I carried a degree in finance and $48,000 in student loans. Going back to my parents' house was the last thing I was going to do, so I applied to every opening I could find and landed a junior analyst role in Seattle. The pay barely covered my rent, and the hours were brutal. I swallowed every slight, every dismissive smirk, and kept grinding. By 2018, I was promoted. By 2020, I had climbed to senior consultant. My loan balance shrank as my bonuses grew. Then came 2021. I will never forget the feeling of standing on the balcony of the penthouse I had just closed on for $1.8 million. The unit overlooked Puget Sound, glass walls opening to a sweeping view of the water. I ran my hands along the marble counters in the kitchen and pressed my forehead against the cool glass, as if I had to touch it to believe it was mine. I had done it without anyone's applause. But when my parents visited a few months later, their reactions were predictable. Arthur walked through the entryway, asked the price, and whistled low, saying it was a lot for someone single. Beatrice shook her head, running a hand over the leather sofa, and said a woman did not need that much space all to herself. She suggested I should think about renting it out until I found a husband. I smiled tightly and offered them coffee. What I did not realize was that the very place I had bought to symbolize freedom would soon become the center of a storm my family would unleash. Chloe had a way of floating through life, as if the ground beneath her would never give way. She bounced from one job to another without consequence, supported by credit cards and quiet transfers from my parents' account. Then she met Julian Morales. Julian was a high school history teacher. He was not flashy, did not seem like the type to chase after status symbols. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 9 months, Chloe was flashing a diamond ring. Arthur and Beatrice promised to cover the entire wedding venue, flowers, catering, and dress. One evening, not long after their engagement, we gathered at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Seattle. We ordered wine and appetizers, laughter filling the table. At one point, Beatrice watched them with misty eyes before turning to me. She said how wonderful it was that Chloe had finally found her person. Then, almost casually, she added that Chloe and Julian would need plenty of space once they were married. I felt the comment hanging in the air, heavy with implication. Arthur chimed in with a smile, saying that young couples deserve to start off strong with a good home and support from family. I swallowed hard and pushed my pasta around the plate, pretending I did not understand. But Beatrice did not let it go. She set down her fork, folded her hands, and said that my place was so big, so beautiful, and what a gift it would be if Chloe could have that as her first marital home. Her words were coated in sweetness, but underneath was a sharpness that cut deep. Julian looked startled. Chloe smirked as though the idea was not shocking at all. Arthur raised his glass in a mock toast, saying how wonderful it would be for family to support family. I managed to smile weakly and say I was happy for Chloe, but inside, my heart pounded with a mixture of disbelief and anger. My home, the very symbol of everything I had fought for, was being spoken of like a toy that could be passed down to the favored child. The weeks leading up to Chloe's wedding became a blur of fittings and endless phone calls. The pressure was relentless. Over dinner at my parents' house, Arthur dropped remarks about how young couples today struggled with housing and how lucky Chloe was to have family support. Beatrice nodded and added that blessings came in many forms, especially when one sister had more than enough and another was just beginning her journey. In the middle of all this, my cousin Sophia reached out. She called me one evening and asked to meet for coffee. Sophia hesitated at first, then leaned in and lowered her voice. She said she had overheard our aunt and Beatrice talking during a bridal shower prep session. They were discussing the penthouse not as a possibility, but as though it was already decided. Sophia repeated their words carefully, saying they had mentioned how generous it was of me to give Chloe such a gift, and how it would make the wedding unforgettable. The room seemed to tilt around me. My parents were not just hinting anymore. They were building a narrative, one where my years of sacrifice were erased, and my achievement was handed to Chloe as though it had been waiting for her all along. The morning of the wedding broke bright and heavy. The Botanic Gardens looked like something out of a magazine. Rows of white chairs lined a lush green lawn, and chandeliers glistened inside the reception tent. I walked down the aisle as a bridesmaid, feeling an undercurrent beneath it all, as though the beauty was just a veil stretched over something darker. The ceremony flowed easily, but the reception shattered the illusion of family unity. When it came time for speeches, Arthur stood. He cleared his throat and tapped the microphone, the sound silencing the room. He spoke of Chloe's generosity, her heart, how she always thought of others before herself. Then came the sentence that made my chest lock tight. Arthur's voice lifted, and he said that today was not just about love, but about family support. He told the guests how proud he was that Chloe was starting her marriage with a gift that symbolized stability and care. He said our family had been blessed beyond measure, and tonight was proof of that blessing. A ripple moved through the tables, faces turning, eyes sliding in my direction. The implication was clear enough. Conversations swirled after the speech. Guests leaned close to each other, whispering, their eyes flicking back to me. A couple stopped by my table and said how wonderful it was of me to be so giving. I just nodded, my smile brittle. My pulse quickened each time another person mentioned generosity or sacrifice. When the father-daughter dance began, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to say no, to stop letting them script my life in front of strangers. The music thumped through the reception tent when Beatrice's hand clamped around my wrist. She murmured something to a passing aunt about needing a word with me, then tugged me toward the hallway leading behind the catering stations. Arthur was already waiting there in a small storage room lined with extra chairs. The door shut behind us, muffling the sound of celebration. Arthur did not waste time. He told me to sign over the penthouse to make it official as a wedding gift. His words came out like an order, not a request, as if he had the authority to decide what I should do with the only thing I had fought so hard to achieve. My voice finally cracked the silence. I told them no. I said I had earned that home, every dollar, every sleepless night. It was not theirs to give. It was not anyone's but mine. Beatrice's face pinched with frustration. She told me giving them the penthouse would prove that I cared about something bigger than myself. I asked her where she had been when I worked double shifts in college, when I lived on coupons, when I scraped together every cent to pay off loans no one helped me with. She looked away, as if the wallpaper held more value than my words. Arthur stepped closer, his presence towering, his breath sharp with wine. He said if I refused, I would regret it. He told me that if I did not sign, I was no longer his daughter. I straightened my spine, locking into steel. I told him the penthouse was mine. I said there was nothing to negotiate, nothing to sign, nothing to give away. I reached for the doorknob, pulled it open, and walked away, leaving their glares behind me. I tried to blend back into the sea of formal suits and dresses, but Arthur's hand clamped around my arm. His grip was iron, pulling me forward through the crowd until we stood at the center of the reception hall. The music dulled as people noticed the scene unfolding. He raised his glass, his voice booming across the room. He thanked everyone for being there, praised Chloe and Julian for their bright future, and then, with a smile that made my stomach twist, announced that the family had one more gift to celebrate. He said his eldest daughter would be giving her sister and new brother-in-law the keys to her penthouse. A hush swept across the crowd, followed by scattered claps of surprise. 150 heads turned toward me, eyes searching, waiting for my nod of agreement. My chest tightened, heat rising up my neck. I found my voice, sharp but steady. I said it was not true. I told them there would be no such gift, that my home belonged to me and me alone. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Julian's face flushed. Chloe froze beside him, her bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. Arthur's smile dropped. He hissed that I was humiliating him, humiliating all of us. He shouted that I was selfish, ungrateful, that I dared to spit in their faces. I did not flinch. I looked him in the eye and repeated my answer. No. That one word ignited him. His hand shot forward before I could move. The sound of his palm against my cheek cracked like thunder across the hall. My head snapped to the side, the sting blooming hot across my skin. For a second, the world tilted. The silence in the room was deafening. Gasps broke out. Chairs scraped. A woman cried out. Someone shouted to call the police. The madness of it all made my stomach churn. I touched my cheek, the skin burning under my fingers, but my eyes stayed locked on his. My voice, calm and cold, cut through the chaos. I told him he had just lost me. The room spun with shock. Julian stepped forward as if to intervene, then faltered. Chloe's lips trembled, but she said nothing, frozen by the weight of her own silence. I turned away, the echo of whispers trailing me like shadows. Guests parted as I walked toward the exit, their stares sharp and heavy. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step heavier than the last. The wedding that was meant to be a picture of unity now lay in shards on the floor, and I was the one who had refused to bleed for it. When I reached my building, my phone started buzzing almost immediately. Dozens of messages piled in. Beatrice accused me of ruining the wedding, of humiliating Chloe on the most important day of her life. Chloe's silence cut deeper than anything. Julian sent a message late into the night. It was polite, almost formal, saying he was sorry things had gotten out of hand and hoping we could all put it behind us. He had watched me get struck across the face, and that was all he had to say. I blocked every single one of their numbers. By the third day, the storm shifted. My inbox pinged with an email from a law firm. It was from my parents' attorney. I had 14 days to transfer ownership of my penthouse to Chloe and Julian, or I would be permanently removed from their estate. The ultimatum sat on the screen. It was not just emotional coercion. Now they had turned it into a legal threat of a deadline that sought to corner me. I closed my laptop slowly. I turned my phone off completely. The silence felt brutal at first, but soon it became a kind of relief. Months slipped by in a way that felt both slow and inevitable. I started going to therapy, learning to make decisions without rehearsing how my family might react. One afternoon in late winter, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Julian asked to meet. We chose a small coffee shop tucked in a side street. He looked exhausted. He admitted Arthur and Beatrice had been telling him and Chloe for months that I was planning to hand over the penthouse. He said things with Chloe had already begun to fray, that he felt smothered by my parents' involvement in every detail of their lives. I listened but offered no comfort. The lies they told had poisoned not just my relationship with them, but his marriage too. A week later, a thick envelope arrived from a Portland law office. I had been formally removed from my parents' estate. I read it twice and felt nothing I would have recognized in the past. No panic, no urge to fix what I did not break. I slid the letter into a folder and closed the drawer. At home, I kept shaping my space into a place where I could exhale. I started hosting small dinners for the friends and colleagues who had stood by me when everything else had collapsed. The air filled with laughter, and for the first time in years, my home felt alive. Looking around the table, I realized this was what family could feel like. Not a performance, not a hierarchy, but a choice made in love and respect. Family, I realized, is not the first label you are given. It is the circle you choose, and the circle that chooses you back. It is the people who celebrate your strength without requiring your silence. It is the space you guard so that the person you are can keep growing. If you have ever walked through a version of this, if you have set a boundary and been told that love requires you to erase it, I hope you will share your story in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from and what moment taught you that your worth does not rely on surrender. If my journey helped you feel less alone, tap like and subscribe to my channel so we can keep building a place where courage is ordinary and kindness is not conditional.